The biggest issue in this state, I'm hearing it everywhere I go. I've done 27 town halls. I'm about to do my 28th town hall. Affordability, cost of housing, cost of childcare, cost of education, particularly higher education. And you're seeing the issue of affordability manifest in homelessness, the likes of which we've never seen in our lifetime out on the streets and sidewalks. The poverty rates in this state are made worse because of the issue of affordability. I'm on the UC Regions, CSU Board of Trustees. The cost of tuition is skyrocketed. And so those are issues that, as governor, I pledge to address head on. I'm a small business person. I started right out of college a small business. Today I have 23 small businesses, about 800 employees up and down the state. And I don't say that to impress anyone, but to impress upon anyone watching that I care deeply about our small business community. And I think the state of California doesn't care as much as we should. And I think economic growth has to be the foundation to which everything else is built. And the state, frankly, has not done enough to support our economic growth in this up and down in our diverse communities. So I commit to doing more in that respect as well. We have 8 million people living below the poverty line in California. And when you look at supplemental poverty index as it relates to our children, you have about 46% at or near poverty. 2 million of our children below the poverty line. It's unacceptable in this, the sixth largest economy in the world, and in a state whose population is larger than 163 nations. So that disparity between the haves and the have-nots persists here unlike any other state in America. Fundamental to that is affordability, the cost of housing. It drives those poverty rates up. The reality is if you're low income, universally 0% of our low income families can afford housing, and about half of everybody in the state can afford housing. So we have not been building enough housing. We've averaged about 100,000 housing units. We need to quadruple that, quite literally quadruple that housing production in order to stabilize pricing. But this issue of poverty, as a Democrat, is the issue that should wake up all of us, at least enliven our senses, because that's happened on our watch, and we have a unique responsibility to address that issue. I think the issue of sanctuary policy is profoundly important. Look, sanctuary is not a shield for criminal activity. It was never intended to be, and Governor Brown made significant amendments to the sanctuary bill that was presented to him to make sure we can collaborate and we can coordinate with federal authorities when people break the law, particularly violent felons. But for everybody else, we don't want to see families destroyed. Well, I think Governor Brown's done a remarkable job at solvency triage. We had a $27 billion deficit when he started. We had 12.4% unemployment. Tim Draper wanted to split the state into 6 in 2010. Now, fast forward today, we've had 4.4% GDP, 3.7%, 2.9% over the last 3 years. We've had 91 plus months of net job growth. We've seen unemployment drop below 4.5%. We're now debating the size of surpluses. So I think the governor's done a remarkable job. The question, though, is what's the plan for greatness? And how can we unite this state, north and south, and address the disparities and the persistent issue of affordability? And I think that's what I want to bring with a renewed vigor, building on Governor Brown's legacy, investing more in higher education to bring down the costs of education, invest more in reaching out to existing businesses, not just recruiting new businesses, but supporting organic small business growth. And as an entrepreneur, I'll have a different perspective than, frankly, most previous governors have had on entrepreneurialism. And then I want to address the issue of homelessness and poverty in a very different way. It's just unacceptable, the homeless rates in this state. And the state of California, with all due respect, has been nowhere to be found on that issue. And I think the next governor, and I certainly commit, if I am successful, to addressing that issue in a much more comprehensive way. I was the original co-sponsor of that initiative back over a decade ago. My concern is the costs associated with the high-speed rail, but I support high-speed rail as a concept, and I believe we can get phase 1 accomplished. The deeper question is, how do we get it over the Tehachapi Mountains, San Gabriel Mountains? How do we finalize that second phase and get it into Southern California? That remains an open-ended question, but I'm going to be more pragmatic about being more honest about the costs, more transparent about where we are as it relates to timelines and what the trade-offs are. I support the vision, but with much more transparency and I think a little bit more forthrightness in terms of where the project stands. And I'm not going to try to play politics with it. I'm not going to try to mislead the taxpayers. I'm a taxpayer. You're a taxpayer. We care about how our money is being used, and I want to make sure it's being used wisely and appropriately. Phase one, we can get done. The deeper question is an open-ended one, how to get it down into Southern California. At the end of the day, there's 27 people running for governor. There's 5 well-known Democrats. There's 2 well-known Republicans. Republicans probably have a universe of about 40% of the vote. Democrats will compete with about 58-ish% of the vote. So we're competing in a bucket against 58% of the universe, 2 Republicans about 40%. I still think it's very likely that you're going to have a race with a Democrat and a Republican. It's an open primary. It's the top 2 votes. One of my opponents in particular, $10+ million, remarkably, was put in just 3 hours. It took us 3 years to raise that kind of money. And we project 70% of the vote, 70% of the vote will be in before Election Day. So in many ways, this election starts in a week or so. We're many parts but one body. So we're certainly part of the United States of America. But I think California as a nation state, our economy is so large. When I went to Korea a number of years ago, right after the free trade agreement was codified, we made the case that for Korea, California is the largest trading partner in the United States of America. We have the opportunity in an international stage to do things that no other state can do. We saw, just as one example, just 5 days after we pulled out of the Paris Accords, Governor Brown made his way to Beijing and sat down in the presidential palace with President Xi and signed a memorandum of understanding, not as the head of state, but a head of a state, California. No other governor could do that. And I think it shows where California can truly lead in the international stage. And as a mayor that opened offices, foreign offices, I want to do the same thing as governor. I want to open offices in South Korea. I want to open foreign offices, and I want to extend the narrative of free and open trade. Despite what's going on in Washington, D.C., we want to embrace those principles here in California. Well, I think it's always healthy when people are sitting across the table from one another. It's always healthy when people are communicating. Frankly, this vitriol going back and forth has not been constructive. It's been destructive. It's been destabilizing. I can only imagine the stress of people living in South Korea and those that have family members out there watching the nightly news, listening to the punditry, reading these tweets going back and forth. So I imagine it's very calming that the president seems to have changed his tune, and we're going to see a kind of diplomatic exchange that's long overdue. I'm very hopeful that something constructive can come from that. At the end of the day, what we need is more communication, less vitriol, less attack, and more focus and understanding. That's the kind of world I want my 4 young kids to grow up in. I imagine you do as well. Being a 4th-generation San Franciscan, growing up in a city, again, over 1/3 of our population's Asian, I have great reverence for the Asian community broadly, and understand the nuances and distinction between the Chinese community, the Korean community, Vietnamese community, Filipino community, and the like. And one of the things that I commit to the community, particularly the Korean community, is broad representation in key positions, key agencies, key points of contact, particularly in the area of higher education. It's not lost on me when I look around at the UC Regents and the CSU Board of Trustees. We do not have broad representation in the Asian community. That will change if I'm governor. I was very proud of the key appointments that I made when I was chief executive of San Francisco. I have a strong track record of advocacy and support. This is not a politician campaigning. This is someone that's actually been in position of responsibility that has advanced the needs, desires, and aspirations of the Asian community in very substantive and meaningful ways, and I will continue to do that if I'm successful as governor, including in judicial appointments as well, which is incredibly important. As it relates to the issues of affirmative action, this issue about 2 years ago was brought to the fore. There was a lot of friction, a lot of acrimony, and luckily people pulled back. And the key now is to bring our diverse communities together, because one thing I don't want to see is this issue fester between the African American community, the Latino community, and the Asian community. At the end of the day, what makes us so special as a nation is our ability to live together and advance together, prosper together across every conceivable difference. Let's not do something that will engender distrust. Let's try to see a pathway where we can come together. And I think what the mistake was 2 years ago is that bill was introduced top down. And if there's any additional consideration of amending our affirmative action, that has to be organic, it has to be bottom up, and it has to be an inclusive process that doesn't divide our communities. Our slogan of the campaign is courage for a change. And the reason I say courage is the one thing I think distinguishes my candidacy from others is that experience, a willingness to take risks, being on the leading and cutting edge of a lot of new ideas, universal health care, universal preschool, out front on some controversial issues around marriage equality, but a willingness to take on tough tasks and try to bring people together, but also a fiscal discipline, balanced budgets in the midst of a recession. Courage for a change is the slogan, but it's also a mantle of responsibility to advance change in a way that advances a framework that ultimately brings everybody together. Well, single payer exists in almost every industrialized nation around the rest of the world, but single payer means different things to different people. There's the German model, which is more of a multi-payer system, the Bismarck model. There's the Beveridge model, which is more the UK model. And then there's the national health insurance model, which is more of the Canadian model. California currently has versions of all of those three. We have a single payer system for our veterans. We have a single payer system called Medi-Cal. We have a single payer system called Medicare. So we already have a multi-payer system, and that includes single payer. And so for me, the notion of universal health care is my top priority. As mayor, I delivered on this promise. It's just enjoyed its 10th anniversary, and I'm fully committed to exploring a single payer financing system that, again, brings people around the table, doesn't divide the state. I think we're uniquely positioned to achieve it. I just want to express my absolute appreciation to the Korean community and make a point that for the last 7 years as Lieutenant Governor, I've been spending time here in Southern California. I want to be a strong advocate, not only for the Korean community here in Southern California, but for Southern California more broadly. One thing that I hope the community understands is my deep respect and my deep commitment to advancing diverse voices into the administration in Sacramento and to making sure that the Korean community feels empowered and feels respected. And that's why we're here, to make that case. And I look forward to more conversations like this and more engagement. And I hope you look forward to many ads you'll be seeing up on TV over the course of the next few weeks. And I'd be honored to have your support June 5th.